Hi guys, it's Mr. McCrery back. Just doing the best we can to make it through all these closures. I've got today another what I think is super interesting talk or presentation on Marion's entertainment history. So this is liable to be a long one. So I want to go ahead and get you prepped. I know I've gotten some decent feedback from some of you that you found these things at least somewhat enjoyable and informational. And I guess by putting them out here like this, maybe you can share them with your families and kind of sit around and enjoy showing your folks all the things that the kind of stuff we do in class when we get a chance to talk about this stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and start presenting my screen here so that we can get busy on our work. Hopefully by now you've gone ahead and opened up your notes and you've got those prepped and ready to go. I'm going to go down here and we're going to get to this particular slideshow right here. And there you go. I think you see me over here on the right hand side. So that means the presentation's over there. So here we go. Again, entertainment, all pretty cool stuff. At least I think it is. The title of our talk today is Chautauqua. That's how you pronounce that, Chautauqua, cinema, Crystal Lake, and the NFL. Yes, really, the NFL, the same one that you watch on Sundays, the same one that's got the Browns and the Bengals and the Packers and the Cowboys and the Patriots and all those teams. That very same NFL, believe it or not, has a history right here in your hometown. And we're going to talk about it today. So let's talk about, like I always do, every time we go over any of these things and we start to talk about history, we start talking first and foremost about the way people used to do it. Now, things are a lot different today than they used to be, but way back when, people had to entertain themselves the best way they knew how. And one of those ways was down there on the Scioto River here in Marion County. They had log rolling contests. This was something that was done all over the place. Some of you may or may not know what log rolling is, so I want to share that with you. This is the first time I've done this, so let's see if this is going to work. I know you're probably sneaking a few things in there, but let's take a look at what log rolling is. Check this out. You guys seen this before? So this is log rolling. They're trying knocking each other off the log by spinning it real quick. So you can imagine that boys, young men on the Scioto River 200 years ago doing this. Very cool. Very cool. So there you go. That's log rolling. For those of you who didn't know what log rolling was, that's something they used to do way back in the long time ago days. Another thing, as we move through here, we said log rolling. How about this? Family reunions. Even today, right? Family reunions are a great thing. Realize that people didn't have, but don't forget that Marion in the 1820s was essentially the frontier. There were very few people relatively in this part of Ohio. Southern Ohio had been established, remember, south of the Greenville Treaty Line, but Marion is new, right? So this is 1822. It's a newly established county. People are starting to filter into the area. So there's a lot of people that are living a frontier lifestyle. So for them, family reunions are a really big deal. Get everybody together, have a big potluck dinner, all that kind of stuff. Church socials were also very important to them. The church was a centralized location for them to do all sorts of things. So imagine a lifestyle where you are working at the homestead 6 days a week, sun up to sundown. If you're a young lady, like some of you who are watching are, you would certainly be in a situation where at some of your ages, 16, 17 years old, you might be considering, or Your family might be considering trying to find you a husband and trying to give you, not give you, I guess, but give you an opportunity to meet a young man that you could start your own life with. If you were a young woman in the age of, maybe 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, you were staying home with your mother. You were responsible for things like gardening and maybe most of them take care of the house, obviously, but most importantly, maybe was raising the younger children. If you were a young man at that age, 17, 18, 19 years old, you would start to begin to think about starting a career, have your own home. And when I say career, I mean having your own home, maybe getting some land, working the land for yourself. As far as younger teenage boys, your job would have been helping your father in the field. So church socials was that one day a week. For those of you familiar with Christianity, you know that Sunday is recognized as the Sabbath in that religion. And so Sundays are kept open for worship. And so church was an all-day thing. They would go in the morning, there would be worship, there would always be some kind of a lunch or a dinner afterwards, again, of the potluck style. So these church socials were not only a place where games were going on and people would socialize and enjoy themselves, but it was also a place where, believe it or not, there was a lot of courting going on, which is that phrase, kind of that term for dating back in the old days, where one young man might ask to begin seeing a young lady. And that's going to happen a lot of times between families at a church. So that was kind of how it was done early on. Now, if you look down here at the bottom, this sounds like something I'm sure you're all really fired up to get to watch, and that's Friday Spelling Bees at the schoolhouse. We pulled this information directly out of the 1883 Marion County history book, and this was mentioned directly. So spelling bees at the schoolhouse. Heck, even today, right? Spelling bees are on ESPN sometimes. So you can imagine they were at least some level of entertainment for these settlers. Now, for you and me, this doesn't sound real exciting. And frankly, a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today right now in 2020 might seem to you like, oh, that's not all that fun. But realize that all the things that you have that they didn't have to entertain them. So this is something that I want you to keep in mind as we move through our talk today. Chautauqua. Now let's take just a second to talk about what the Chautauqua is. Now the Chautauqua was a festival. And because I do this in PowerPoint and this is a Google slide, it doesn't always talk real well. So that's why the formatting is weird, as you see there up at the top. But it began in the city of Chautauqua, New York, which is located on Lake Chautauqua. Lake Chautauqua is an Indian word. And Chautauqua is basically, imagine a large fair, but it's about education and I guess intellectual pursuits. Chautauquas were really very important. They started here in Marion in 1913. I'll share that with you in a second. As it says here, they featured plays, music, political and religious speakers, children's activities, all those kinds of things. So if you can imagine a large festival, it had a main tent, and then eventually we would have what they call a Chautauqua Pavilion, which I'll share with some photos with you in a second. But really kind of interesting stuff that they would do there. There would be political speakers, people would speak on science, people would speak on the latest gadgets or the latest inventions or ways of bettering yourself, different ways of thinking or worshiping, all those kind of things. They had bands and orchestras, and they put on plays and all kinds of interesting things. And you would buy tickets per day with a whole schedule of events from about 9 in the morning until 8 in the evening, a pretty consistent flow of activities from that time. There would be food tents and all kinds of things for people to enjoy along the way. Marion's first one was held in 1910. I guess 1913 is when the pavilion opened, so I apologize for that Marion's first one is held in 1910, and it was held at our Marion County Fairground. You all know where the fairgrounds are. They're on the north side of town. Eventually, however, it would move to Garfield Park. Now, Garfield Park, you know, is the one there on the east side of town, just down the road or down the street from Harding High School. So the pavilion, like I said, was built in 1913 at Garfield Park. There was no amplification in the theater. It was really pretty cool. Let me share a couple of things with you. These photographs. Interestingly enough, I hate this about this PowerPoint and Google Slides not working because, you know, these photos are usually flying in and out. And for whatever reason, they're jammed kind of at the end of each slide. So bear with me as we move through here. But here you see a quintet of saxophone players. They would be going on. I thought this picture is really cool. This is of the Marion Steam Shovel Band. Back then, in those days, people did all kinds of interesting things to entertain themselves. Remember, you didn't have TV, you didn't have radio. So if you were in high school and you were in the high school band, when you got out of school and got a job, let's say at the Marion Steam Shovel, you might be there with a bunch of other people. Says, you know what, I really like playing the instrument, or I liked being in the marching band. And so it was not uncommon for industries like the Steam Shovel, like the Huber Manufacturing Company, to offer these opportunities for entertainment for their employees. They would sponsor these things. They also sponsored things like baseball teams, softball teams, basketball teams, adult leagues, adult recreational leagues, and they were played all the time in the appropriate season, basketball in the winter and baseball in the spring and summer. And they would offer them an opportunity to play one another. So maybe on Monday night, you're on the Huber team and you play the Shovel team. And then the next time you play, let's say, on Wednesday night, and now the Huber, you're playing Marion Malleable's team. So they just had what were called as industrial leagues, and they were really very competitive. And frankly, a lot of professional athletes historically rose up out of these industrial leagues, which is really kind of cool. Here you go. This is an important figure, and I think he's in your notes as well. So I want you to write this name down. Go ahead and take this name down. This fellow is William Jennings Bryan. Jennings, Jennings. Jennings, William Jennings Bryan, Bryan. This guy was a Democratic nominee for President of the United States in, 1896. And so he was seen as a great religious orator. He was a great politician, and he was well respected in the Democratic Party way back when. Marion, being a strong Democratic place, as you saw in our last presentation that I gave you, Bryan would have been the kind of guy that was well received at the Chautauquas here in Marion. Let's move on. Here you go. This is pretty cool. This is at the grandstand at the fairground. This guy was such a popular speaker that he was. They took his show over to the grandstand. If you know what an evangelist is a Christian preacher whose job it is to try and testify to as many people as possible and get as many people to convert and follow Christianity as possible. You see them on TV all the time on Sundays, and if you turn to the right channel, they're on all the time on those religious channels that are available. But this particular guy down here, his name is Billy Sunday, of all things, ironically, right? Billy Sunday is his name, and he packed them in here when he came to preach in Marion. Here's another one. This is just a little thing for kids to take a look at, as you have a little diorama set up for the kids, which is kind of cool, with little dolls, and I think there might even be a couple of chickens in there, which is kind of funny. All right, now take a look at this. I think this is pretty cool. This is the Chautauqua. Now, if you look in the background, you'll see it here. This is the roof of the Chautauqua. The Chautauqua was, again, completed in 1913, and it seated upwards in the neighborhood of 2,500 people. You can imagine it like an auditorium built in the round. Here's another one. I think I've got another photograph. There you go. You can see it. It was really a very, very impressive thing. I know I found several newspaper articles that outlined the building of the Chautauqua Pavilion at Garfield Park, and I thought it was exceptionally neat to look at. Now, if we look here, this is Garfield Park right now, and so this is Center Street down here, and your high school would be obviously out here if you can follow my arrow. Here's the softball field. Now, if you look back here, you'll notice this very large basketball courts where they've got the hoops in the middle, and then they've got a number of basketball courts around. It would have been in this space here that the Chautauqua Pavilion sat. On that week of the Chautauqua, when they held them, they would have the pavilion here, and then all these trees, which at that point were much younger, and I'm sure there were even other trees there. All this area, all along here, the softball diamond was not here. This was all tent space. People, when they would show up for the Chautauqua, they came from all the surrounding areas, and they would set up a tent, and they would quite literally camp out. They'd camp in their tent, and they would, get something at the food stand, and then they would sleep, and then the next morning they'd get up and they'd enjoy the entertainment, and then spend the entire week, some people, doing that. So it was incredibly popular. Now, this was in Marion. They had Chautauquas all over the United States. Chautauqua, New York was the first one. They continue to have them in Chautauqua, New York, all the way up until, every summer, including this one coming up here in 2020, there will be a Chautauqua. They've died out, obviously, since then. But it used to be something that happened in I don't want to say well-to-do or advanced cities, but I guess I said it. And Marion was a progressive city that had a lot of opportunity for things like this. Here's another one there, zoomed in on that area. All right. There you go. This is good. I like this photo. This is the stage of the Chautauqua. I know I've been talking quite a bit, and we've still got a long way to go. You can always pause the video and come back and kind of take a look at the timestamp there, and then come back to this anytime you want. But here you go. This is the Chautauqua Auditorium. Take a look at the stage here, and you'll notice that it's got that concave shape, which means, like I said down here, no microphones, no speakers, and yet a person could stand on this stage, or as you see here, a band could play on this stage without any microphones and fill a space that would project sound for upwards in the neighborhood of 2,500 to 3,000 people. Really pretty remarkable thing, a really neat thing. This served, as Chautauquas would eventually fade out, and I think I've got that information for you here in a second, but as they would eventually fade out, the auditorium, or the pavilion, as it was known, stayed up and was available for all sorts of different things in Marion. As a matter of fact, Harding High School held its graduations at the Chautauqua stage, at the Chautauqua Pavilion, for a number of years. My grandparents, I tell you about all the time, graduated in 1948 from Harding High School, and they graduated right there in the Chautauqua Auditorium. Pretty cool. All right, how about our city parks? This is pretty cool. Parks are entertainment. A lot of you get an opportunity to go to the park and enjoy going there, the playgrounds, the pool over at Lincoln, the ball diamonds, all those kinds of things. Some of you like going to just kind of have a picnic or just enjoy the green space. And that was the whole idea. Those were established in 1907. They were named for, at that point in time, the assassinated, or what they used to say, the martyred presidents, the presidents that had been killed while in office. Obviously, those were the first three parks. We've got many more now, but the first three: Lincoln, McKinley, and Garfield. It's really kind of interesting. Lincoln Park, which is on our north side, McKinley Park, which is on the south side over by the hospital, and Garfield, which we already talked about on the east side, near where Harding High School sits now. Those were the first three parks. They were land that was purchased by the city, set aside solely for the purpose of green space for people to enjoy. They were originally simply referred to as the North Side Park, the South Side Park, the East Side Park. And I read in an archived edition of the Marion Star a really neat little article where they were concerned about the parks. If we don't name these things, they're going to forever be known as East Side, North Side, and South Side. We don't want that. So they were literally, it was after a city council meeting, and somebody kind of said this as they were, how people kind of mill around after a meeting and just kind of shooting the breeze. And a guy says, hey, we better do something about naming these parks. And so they're kind of just him hauling around, and somebody says, well, why don't we name them for the martyred presidents, for the assassinated president? All right, sounds like a great idea. Let's do it. So right then and there, they decided that's what they were going to do. And then they said, well, which is which? So quite literally, they got out a hat and they put the North Side Park, they put the names Lincoln, McKinley, and Garfield on 3 slips of paper, and they had 3 individuals draw. So one individual represented the North Side Park, another South Side, another East Side, and they literally laid the hat out and they pulled them out. And the guy that represented the North Side Park pulled Lincoln. The guy that pulled the South Side Park pulled McKinley, and the guy who pulled the East Side pulled Garfield. So that's why they're named that way. They're named for the presidents, but they're not named, this park is Lincoln because for anything other, ironically, than just it got pulled out of a hat. It's pretty cool. It's pretty neat to kind of find that out, but it was really kind of neat. So the parks, there you go. I had forgotten that I had added that little slide or that little note in there. So I apologize for that. Here's a picture of Lincoln Park, a postcard of Lincoln Park. You might recognize this main driveway here. If you look back in the back, you'll notice the big shelter house. That shelter house is on the exact same spot that it is today. It's not the same shelter house, but it's on the same spot. If you look at these kind of driveways as they kind of veer off, it looks very familiar to how Lincoln Park is set up even today. Way back here in the back is where the parks would be now. And then the pool would be right over here. Son of a gun. Let's back this up just real quick. Sorry, guys. There's the Lincoln Park shelter house as it appeared back in the early 1900s. Obviously, it doesn't look anything like that today, but it's in the same spot. And then right here is McKinley Park. You guys know that is McKinley Lake off of Prospect Street. This is where all the ducks are. You can't hardly go on Prospect Street or go over there by the McKinley Park. You can't do it without thinking about the ducks, or goodness gracious, if you want to take a walk over there, the ducks will attack you because they all want bread and fed and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of interesting. Now, what I will tell you is McKinley Park used to be only that green space where the lake was. So if you can imagine where the street runs along the lake there, that street's always been there. So where the lake is and the green space all around there, that was McKinley Park. On the other side of the street, where the project playground is, where the hospital starts its space, where the hospital has the where those fields are, where the little kids play soccer and that kind of stuff, that was not part of McKinley Park. That, believe it or not, was actually a golf course. It was the old Mar-O-Del golf course, Mar-O-Del, Marion, Delaware. So it was Marion, Delaware. Mar-O-Del is what it was known as, and it was on Marion, Delaware Road, which is 423, which is where the mall is and all that kind of stuff. But that was the golf course. Eventually, that would be sold so that they could build the hospital, and that green space became known, or added, I guess you would say, to what was known as McKinley Park. All right, how about this? For your listening and viewing pleasure, this is kind of cool. All right, so let's talk a little bit about theaters in Marion. The first theaters in Marion were called vaudeville theaters. When you and I think of the theater, the first thing that comes to mind is a movie theater. We go in, we watch a movie, we have popcorn and a pop, maybe a bar of candy, and we enjoy ourselves. Well, before moving pictures, it was live entertainment in front of us. But if you want to go watch live entertainment at a theater, you go to Big Palace. And we're going to talk about the Palace in a second. But because live entertainment was really the sole form of entertainment for people, as far as in a theater setting, it was known as vaudeville. The theaters were very small. Um, Honestly, comparable. Imagine the theaters, the individual theaters at the mall. Like when you go to the mall, the movies at the mall, it's what's known as a multiplex, which means there are many screens in one house, one movie house, right? Well, imagine that the different theaters, the group of seats and screen at the front. So take that group of seats and then put a stage in the front. Well, those were the vaudeville theaters, and let me tell you, they were often very small. I've got a couple of pictures here for you that give you an idea just how tiny they were. Sometimes they didn't hold more than 20 or 30 people at a time, and they were in folding chairs. And the kind of entertainment they would watch were known as vaudevillians, obviously named. And they would be jugglers, they would be comedians, they would be singers, dancers, any kind of a small, kind of quick form of entertainment. They would sometimes put on small plays, maybe one-man shows, that kind of stuff. For those of you that have ever watched America's Got Talent, that is a kind of like a vaudeville show. You would, have one family come on and they'd ride unicycles and juggle and whatever, and then somebody else would come on and tell a bunch of jokes. The origins of stand-up comedy are vaudeville. If you've ever heard of Abbott and Costello, maybe your parents have heard, grandparents have heard about Abbott and Costello. They were vaudeville performers. There were lots of them. Three Stooges started out as vaudeville performers. That's the kind of entertainment that we had here in town. And there were several vaudeville theaters. We did have our biggest and most beautiful theater was the Grand Opera House. The Grand Opera House opened in 1896. Ed Huber, who you've all been introduced to, put a lot of money into that, was one of the founding board members of the Grand Opera House. And that went up in 1896. Fire destroyed it in 1910. Now, I've got some interesting photos here for you. But at first, the first thing I want to do is I want to pull up, like I always do, the map of Marion. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to zoom in. The Grand Opera House still stands. It does not serve as a theater anymore. However, it is a very familiar building. So what I want to do is I want to take our little guy here and I'm going to put him right here on State Street. All right, well, went just a hair too far. Let's go back here on South State. Here we go, spin around. Oh, I think you might have just about saw it. I'll tell you what, I think if I do like this, there we go, look at there. So if you look at that building, and look here, we're going to zoom in. Check that out, Grand Opera House. I have no doubt that some of you know where this is on South State Street. And you've seen this. There's the Elks. Oops, sorry. If we go back here, this here is the old post office, or what we call Heritage Hall. Over here, right here it is. Over here is the True Home, the True Museum, which is very cool. So this is the space where the Grand Opera House was. Now, if I go back to here and I present, come on, sucker. All right, let's click through this. Here we go. There we go. Fire destroyed in 1910. Now here's the pain in the caboose for these pictures being at the end. I'm going to have a lot of cool things. There should be pictures sliding in, sliding out, but doggone it, it just doesn't. They don't talk real well, Google and PowerPoint. So that's a bummer. But I'm going to move on, and I promise you those pictures are coming. So motion picture houses were introduced in 1911. Movies started happening. First movies were silent films. There were 7 of them in Marion by 1927. And in 1928, the one that we all know and still appreciate is the Palace Theater. It opened on August 30th, 1928. Now, I want to show you again, these pictures have been pushed in at the back end, which is disappointing, but here they are. Here's the Marion Vaudeville Theater. This is on the corner of Center Street and Union Street. So this is Union, this is West Center. So the palace itself would be right, basically the picture is being taken in front of what would be the palace, and this is Union Street, the hill right here. It runs between this building, and right over here would be City Hall. Right back here is this. So this is that corner. This is Union and Center, and this theater set right there on the corner. And as you notice, it says Vaudeville, so there would have been a lot of live entertainment in there. Here we go. There you go. There's the picture of the Grand Opera House. You can see the letters are just the same. All the windows are the same. Beautiful monument or ornament, I guess you could say, up here on the tops, like a statue. Beautiful inside. Check this out. Isn't that beautiful? That is the inside of the Grand Opera House. It looks very similar. Most of my students say when I show them that, if I covered this up down here, they would say, oh, that's the palace. Well, it wasn't. This is the Grand Opera House on State Street. Beautiful. And believe it or not, I've been lucky enough to be able to go inside of here, and it's still put together in a similar fashion. The balcony's still there. All this railing is still there. The seats have all been removed. It's in a terrible state of disrepair, but I promise you, it has so much potential. I just wish that someone would take the opportunity to fix it up. You know, I wish I had a bunch of money and could pay to have it done. Man, is it beautiful. It's really, really, really cool. And as we said, in 1910, unfortunately, it was destroyed by fire. Here you see the firefighters trying to knock the fire out. It was an electric fire. There were apartments and offices in the space to the back of the theater. And one of the apartments had an electrical mishap and resulted in the place burning down. Take a look at this photograph. You can see the steam. It was in the wintertime, and they tried their best to put the fire out, and they did. And the skeleton itself stayed in good shape. It had a brick outside. So the skeleton of the building, much like we talked about Olney Avenue School, it stayed upright and the insides were gutted. Same thing with the Opera House. Take a look at this. You can really see. This is the aftermath after the fire is put out. That what you see in here, that's the sky. So the Opera House has been completely gutted. I think I've got one more photograph. There you go. There's the inside. The roof is completely collapsed. The balcony has collapsed. It's in terrible, terrible shape. It was people expected it to be a complete loss, but it was, as you can see, it was rebuilt. And for many of you that have grandparents or great-grandparents that grew up in Marion, they may remember the Grand Opera House is what was called the Ohio Theater. The Ohio Theater was a movie house that showed movies in that same environment, in that same place. They built it back up, and it really was very pretty. They did it almost exactly the same way as they had before. Now, I think I've got some pictures of the palace. Oh, look at this. This is the Wonderland Theater. There you go. That's one of the early motion picture houses. This would have shown silent movies. Here we go. Here's the palace. Palace is a gorgeous building, still is. It's one of Marion's great treasures. Here you've all seen the inside. I'm guessing the overwhelming majority of you have seen the inside of the building. The building's really neat because it was built by a man by the name of John Eberson, his group. He was the architect, and he built a whole host of theaters all over the United States, and they were built in what's called the atmospheric style. Now you've all, or I'm guessing, all of you have been inside the Palace Theater, and if you have, you know that it's built to look like you are outside. The roof is painted that real brilliant navy blue or sky blue. There are twinkling stars. They've got a cloud machine. It makes you. It's supposed to make you feel as if you're in a grand Spanish courtyard. Here's John Eberson. There he is, and he's really a very interesting character. Now, I like these photographs because these show the building of the Palace Theater. You can see a couple of things here. Now, the Palace Theater, interestingly enough, is built, the stage and the seating area are actually built on an angle. So you notice this street here. Here's Center Street, and then this street, and I'm ashamed to say that the street's name escapes me right at this very moment, create a right angle. Now, the assumption would be that this would be the entrance, and then the stage would be back here, and it would set in there nice and square. Well, the problem was the gentleman that owned this property back here had a garage, and he refused to sell the land that had his garage on it to the people that wanted to build the palace. And because of that, they didn't have enough room, so they had to kind of whopper jaw the palace building itself on that corner. So when you go in the palace, it's almost like an optical illusion. But when you walk in the palace, it is built to make you feel like you walk straight in and then go straight and look at your seats. But the next time you go in there, when you go in, you'll notice that the seats themselves are angled and the stage is not parallel to Center Street. Instead, it shoots off at an angle. And you can kind of see that by the way the roof is fashioned. You can see that they aren't straight there. I think that's a neat kind of story. Here's a really good look at it. Again, here's Center Street. Here's the other street, but you notice the auditorium, the large empty space that houses the actual theater itself, is catty corner. Kind of a cool little thing. All right, moving on. All right, so let's talk about, just real quick, you should be able to see it there. That's WMRN radio, 1490 AM. That was established in 1940. The FM station in 1953. Originally, AM radio was just about the only radio that people listened to. Today, it's a lot of talk radio. It's a lot of sports. It's probably what your grandpa listens to. It's almost exclusively talk radio today. Frankly, very few of you probably listen to the radio anymore with Spotify and your iPod or iPhones and all that kind of stuff. I almost said iPod. How old I am. But all that stuff, the radio was obviously very important. If you know who Rod Serling is, he's a famous television writer. Rod Serling worked as an announcer at WMRN in 1948. Now, Rod Serling, I have to do this. Please excuse me for going back down here again. Rod Serling is an awesome name, and I want to share this with you. How many of you have heard of the Twilight Zone? Listen to the voice coming in. That's Rod Serling. Excuse me. So, some of you have heard of the Twilight Zone. Oh, come on. So, the Twilight Zone, interestingly enough, was written and made. The originator of the Twilight Zone and the idea of the Twilight Zone, these kind of weird science fiction, kind of horror kind of stories that are really very, very cool. I think you guys know Peele from Key and Peele. His first name escapes me. I'm sure you're probably yelling at your screen right now, but he has come out with a modern Twilight Zone that was on TV, and you can find them, I think, on Hulu or wherever. Really, really cool, kind of weird stories. Rod Serling, his first job out of college was right here in Marion, and he was an announcer on the radio. He worked at WMRN, and frankly, while he was working here, he met and married a young lady who was a student at Ohio State in Columbus, and so he was always very, how should I say, he thought very fondly of his time here in Marion and Central Ohio. And as a matter of fact, you can find a number of newspaper articles of people that worked with him while they were here that continued to um, talk to him as he went on to incredible heights, Emmy awards, and is really kind of respected as one of the great early television writers. He lived on Hain. So if you know where Hain is, Hain is off. It's over by Grant, off of Vine Street. He lives. I can't. I can picture the house. I can't think of the number, but that's where he lived. Upstairs, there was a widow and their teenage daughter had rented out a room in the upstairs there, and that's where he lived while he was there. If you've heard of Huey Lewis, some of you that have moms and dads that are my age in their 40s, grandmas and grandpas in their 50s and 60s, they certainly have heard of Huey Lewis. Huey Lewis is a famous musician, rock and roll musician from the 1980s and early 90s. And he was born in Marion and spent a little bit of time here from about, well, I don't know that he was born in Marion. I should take that back. His father was a doctor. He lived on Girard. So on the west side, he lived on Girard, and he stayed there till about the age of 6 years old. He came and played the Marion Popcorn Festival, and it was really kind of a treat. There's a really good write-up of an interview of him in the Marion Star the year he did the Popcorn Festival that talks about how excited he was to come back here to Marion and go visit his hometown. So there was the WMRN building, which is on North Main Street out across from the prison. If I back that up just a second. This is Main, is what it's on. The building looks exactly the same as it does now. And then if you turn right, this is Marion Williamsport. The prison is out here. This is Fair Park back here, the backside of Fair Park, like Bermuda Drive back in there. There you go. There's Rod Serling. There's that article I was talking about, which is really cool. And there he is. He's again, very famous image of Rod Serling. Here he is again. I would bet that if your parents took a look at that, they would know exactly who he is. Maybe your grandparents for sure. But yeah, he lived in Marion and spent time here when he was fresh out of college. Now, he was a little older because he had served in World War II, but he used the GI Bill to go to college, and then he got a job at WMRN. There you go. Again, those pictures are all at the end, which is kind of a bummer. There's Huey Lewis, his famous album Sports. And if it wasn't going to cause a bunch of ruckus, I would play his song for you like I would if we were in class. But if you want to put him on YouTube, you could certainly find his songs. If you've seen the movie Back to the Future, Marty McFly, 88 miles an hour, right? And off into the future or back into the past, I guess. You can, Huey Lewis does the soundtrack to that. He does a lot of those songs. So he's got a very famous voice. How about the fair? The fair was it held the first one at the Town Plat in 1851. Now, if you remember, the Town Plat is the green space that now is occupied by the courthouse. So right there on the northeast corner of Center and Main was the Town Plat, and that was where the first county fair was, held in 1851, just 29 years after Marion was established as pretty much just a crossroads. Just those original six, just those north, south, east, and west streets, and Main and Center. And then they had a fair, which the point of the fair was to give farmers an opportunity to come in and showcase their livestock so that other farmers who were looking to breed their livestock could get a look at the best examples of livestock that the area had. So if I had a big, strong cow or a big, strong horse, and I was a farmer who was looking to have to breed for horses or breed cows, pigs, things like that, I would get a really good look at the best the county had to offer, and then we would negotiate, the two farmers, about either the sale of the hog or the use of the hog for breeding, or the pig, or the horse or the cow or whatever it is. That's originally what the fair was about. Now, eventually, the fair is something um, quite bigger. The Marion Agricultural Society purchased the 37 acres that is now the Marion County Fairground, and it's right there at the end of North Greenwood Street. So as you know, North Greenwood Street runs dead ends into what today we call Fairground Street, but what was then known as Garden City Pike. And right there, that land right on the other side of where Greenwood dead ends, right there on Garden City Pike, or what's now called obviously Fairground Street, that is the land that was purchased in 1870, and it's been there ever since. Obviously, the street was renamed Fairground Street, just said that. And then, how about this? This is kind of cool. In 1898, at the Marion County Fair, a local inventor by the name of Fred Strobel presented his newest entertainment ride, and it was called the Pleasure Wheel. Now, in your head, you're probably thinking all sorts of things, but you may be thinking of, and I guess I'm going to pause. I'm going to show you a few things. Boy, I hate the pictures coming late. I'm sorry. Here's the main grounds there at the fair. You can see what a popular thing it was. Here's another. This is the grandstand. This is the grandstand at the fair. It's since been taken down. Now I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the grandstand at the Marion County Fairgrounds is really pretty impressive. It was so impressive that it was actually used in a movie. A Hollywood movie with big movie stars was filmed in Marion. The movie was titled Home in Indiana. So here Marion served as a kind of setting for Indiana. But the reason they filmed the movie here is because of our fantastic grandstand and also our horse track. Horse track or horse racing, what they call a sulky racing. That's the kind of racing not where the rider or the jockey is on top of the horse, but sets the cart behind the horse. It was big, it was huge, and Marion had lots and lots of horse races back at that time. Our racetrack was in fantastic condition, and the fairground was a beautiful spot. It was very well respected all around Ohio and quite frankly, the Midwestern part of the United States. And as a result, we filmed a movie here. There's a picture of the grandstand. One of the things that I read was one of the reasons why Marion was selected is because the grandstand was one of the few grandstands in the entire Midwest United States that had it was covered. The roof went from end to end. So you notice here it is all the way. A lot of grandstands just had the center portion covered, but Marion had the whole thing covered, which made it unique. And like I said, kind of a really cool thing for the movie people. There you go. There's the movie poster. 1944 is when the movie was shown. It was shot in the summer of 1943. Walter Brennan is a famous Academy Award-winning actor, and they spent time right here in Marion. Spent about a week. They stayed in Harding Hotel or Hotel Harding, and really, there's a really neat write-up about all these big movie stars being in Marion then in 1944. Cool. So here's the pleasure wheel. Maybe you were thinking along the same lines I was. The Ferris wheel. The Ferris wheel was actually invented by a guy named Ferris, and he invented it for the 1893 World's Expedition in Chicago. It was like World's Fair, and it was massive, massively huge. As a matter of fact, the Ferris wheel was many stories tall in 1893, and it cost as much to ride the Ferris wheel as it did to get in the fair. It was $1. It was $1 for a ride, and it was $1 admission. So it was a big, big deal to get to ride the Ferris wheel. Well, it became so popular that Strobel said, you know what, I can make this on a smaller scale, and I can make it in a way that it can be broken down and it can be taken from town to town to town to town. So it becomes kind of like a traveling attraction. His design was called a cantilever design, which meant that the wheel only occupies one side. So if you look here, you'll see that this wheel here is the main structure, and then a wheel or a spoke, a steel rod would come off of this, go over here and attach to this non-load bearing side. And so basically imagine if you're looking at me now, you can imagine this over here is where the wheel is, and here on each one of these is where the carriage hung. So it just kind of spun this way. It wasn't as if there were two sides to the wheel. It was just one side of the wheel, and then it had spokes coming out, and the seats or benches kind of hung off those, which made it much easier to tear down and take to the next city. So they were advertised as a way for people to purchase them and then move them from fair to fair to fair to fair all across the state or the Midwest, and it's really kind of cool. And that was invented and built right here in Marion. Here you see it, Marion, Ohio. They built it, or Strobel was an employee at the Marion Manufacturing Corporation, which I think is super cool. I just love showing off this logo. Super cool. You see the big lion there, the leader, it says. Pretty cool. How about this? Everybody loves to learn about Crystal Lake. You may not know, probably don't know, that Crystal Lake Park was Marion's amusement park. Much the same way that we have Cedar Point and Kings Island, Marion had its own amusement park. I know some of you are like, no way, really? It absolutely did. Now, Cedar Point has since exploded, right? It's the premier amusement park in the entire United States, maybe even the world. Kings Island is super cool with many, many roller coasters and things like that. Well, all those places started out in the 1920s. There were several of them, and we had ours, and it was called Crystal Lake Park. It was established in 1925. And it was home of the Zip roller coaster. I'm going to talk to you about that just in a moment here. The park eventually closed in 1934, and the main building remained open as a dance hall and roller rink. And there was also a pool. Now, the pool, was actually a quarry. And I'm going to have a whole series of photographs here that I want to share with you that I think you'll find very interesting. Let's take a look. This is the north side of town. This is Main Street coming out here. So this is way out on the north side. So WMRN is right here where my cursor is. If you can see me down here, this is WMRN. So this is Marion Williamsport Road right here. Here's Fair Park, as we've talked about several times. It's where Bermuda comes in. This all comes out here. And then obviously here's the prisons right here. But if you continue out Route 4, you'll know that this 423 runs to Upper Sandusky, and this will run directly north to Bucyrus. Now, if we look right here, you'll notice these two bodies of water that I shared with you when we talked about quarrying before we left the pandemic. And if I zoom in, this space right here is where Crystal Lake Park was. This is where the amusement park was, and this area was known as the quote-unquote pool. Pretty cool. Now I've got, if you've seen this, if you've ever driven out, you can see this. It's private property now. There's a house there. It's owned, like I said, it's private property. Somebody owns it. It's their house. It's their own living area. Here's a page from the Marion Star that shows the Crystal Lake Park opening in 1925. Here you can see the main walkway, the main grounds. The way it worked here, you can see some rides all along. Look at the back. There's a dance hall. The way it worked was there was no admission charge. It was free to get in. What you did is you paid for each ride. So if you wanted to just go hang out at Crystal Lake Park, you could certainly do that. it wasn't until you wanted to go dance with your girlfriend or your boyfriend, or if you wanted to jump on a ride, that you paid a fee to ride the ride. Here you see the little pedal cars that they had for kids. You guys have probably seen something like that. If you've seen the old buggies at Cedar Point that you get in the cars and drive them, those were a lot of fun. They had those. This back here is the dance hall. This is where they would hold dances, would eventually become a roller rink. This back here, this long building here, this was the scooter, which was built, and it had kind of a wavy floor, and they had these small little basically it was a slab of wood, a seat fashioned on top of a couple of roller skates, more or less, and you kind of put your butt on them, and you sit down and you kind of scoot around, and then the floor was built in a fashion that it kind of had big waves in it. So you could kind of push your way up to the top, and then you'd let yourself go, and you just kind of go all around. I've been told that some of you students experienced those scooters in elementary school. You sit on them and you roll around the gym floor. Well, imagine the gym floor is built so that it's got kind of waves and ripples in it, so that you could kind of push all around and use your momentum and gravity to really get you going. It had to have been a lot of fun. You also had a log flume ride, which was, if you've been to Cedar Point, you've been on a log ride, right, where you sit in the little boat and you kind of like a roller coaster, and you go down the waterway there. They had one of those. Here's the one that we want to highlight, though. This is the Zip roller coaster. We had our own roller coaster. You notice it cost 10 cents to ride it. There's the main entrance. So this is Route 4 out here. There we go. There's our picture of the Zip. This, if you've ever seen the Blue Streak at Cedar Point, the Zip and Blue Streak were twins. They were essentially the same ride. The Blue Streak at Cedar Point, it was going at the same time the Zip was going, and they were almost exactly similar. So if you've ever ridden the Blue Streak, you've basically ridden the Zip, and is really, really cool. Blue Streak's a lot of fun. Even I remember as a kid enjoying the Blue Streak. Here you can see, coming around the edge here, you can see the train. They're getting ready to head up the first hill. Notice all the cars in the background. It's quite a busy day. Lots of stuff going on. So it was a pretty cool place. And this was open, like I said, all the time, and it was available for people to enjoy. Here you go. You can see them constructing the Zip. This is the first hill, and then this in the foreground here, this is the return. So they would, just like the Blue Streak, come out and go up, then come back around and hit these two turns here. Now, this is interesting. I'm sure you're looking at that headline and your mouth might have just dropped in. Roller coaster hurls youth to death. Now, Crystal Lake opened on May 30th, 1925. Look at that date. Friday, June 19th, 1925. It wasn't open 3 weeks, and a young man, 18 years old, from Galion, was killed. He was ejected from the train, and him and his cousin, who was visiting, if I'm not mistaken, from Indiana, the young lady, they had their hands up, and back then they had just small lap bars. They didn't have the over-the-shoulder jobs like you're so used to now. And when they come down over that hill, they were ejected. They shot up, and the young man fell on the outgoing track. So if we back up here, when they went down this hill, and it was either this hill or this hill on their way down. So imagine it's absolutely this hill. So he's come down, they're excited. Now they're going up here, and you can imagine they've got their hands up like all kids like to do, and getting ready to go down the hill, and boom, and he shoots out and ends up on this set of tracks, and he falls and breaks his back, skull, and pelvis on the tracks coming out. Now, he was not hit by a train following, but the fall was so awful that he had terrible internal injuries and died later on that evening at the hospital. His cousin was in the hospital for a very long time. So this is June 19th. So it was terrible. It was awful. A lot of people were obviously shocked by this. But this is also very interesting and really quite amazing. So it was on a Thursday afternoon, June 18th, that this boy was killed. I want you to look at the headline here. 7 injured at Crystal Lake Park. 7. This is a completely different incident. Check out the date. Saturday, June 20th, 1925. So on Thursday, a young man was killed. And on Friday, June 19th, 7 people were injured at the Zip roller coaster. Take a look at this. End of broken cable lashes coaster riders. This is an amazing story. And it is so typical of the way people are. Even 100 years ago, they're the same they are today. Imagine this, okay? They all open up their newspapers on Friday and they're like, oh my God, they all hear about this poor kid dying at the Zip roller coaster. Well, because the roller coaster was so new, it was not uncommon for people to just show up, believe it or not, just show up to watch it go, not even ride it. They would pull their car up and they would kind of sit there and just watch it go. And sure enough, when the death happened on Thursday the 18th, the next day, now mind you, the boy died on the 18th. They opened the roller coaster back up on Friday the 19th. Oh, hey, sorry, should have been hanging on, I guess. Right back at it. Here we go again. And sure enough, these people have parked their cars and they're coming there in droves to kind of see this roller coaster and this kid and how he could have gotten hurt and all this terrible stuff. And now some of you may know what a guy wire is. A lot of times you think it's a guide wire, but it's actually a guy wire, G-U-Y, like guy wire. And the idea is it's a very high tension wire that is meant to help stabilize tall structures. You see them on antennas, right? These long, real high tension wires, they pull them real tight on both sides and it keeps something upright. Well, there were wires holding up that helping to stabilize as the train goes over the track to help stabilize everything. They had these wires. Well, some yahoo gets in his car and he decides he's going to back out. And when he backs out, he hits the guy wire and it snaps. And because it's under high tension, this wire comes whipping around and it just in time for these kids that were on this roller coaster to be coming down the roller coaster and the wire come around and just slice them. Now, thankfully, the injuries were not fatal, but it does talk about a number of gashes, meaning big lacerations that needed stitches, burns. A couple people, I think, broke bones. So it was incredible. I remember when I heard about the death, I thought, oh, wow, that's really interesting. So I went to the paper and I looked that up. And then just through just innocently browsing the newspaper, I came across this one and I couldn't believe it was the very next day's paper. Boy, you talk about something crazy. But sure enough, the Zip continued to run. And I will say this, that for the rest of its time here in Marion, the Zip, no injuries. So it had a bad start, and then things really kind of straightened up for it. Okay, let's talk about this just for a second. Ministers fight Sunday amusements. So eventually Crystal Lake Park would be torn down. And one of the reasons it was torn down, or better yet, it would eventually go out of business. I shouldn't say torn down. One of the reasons that Crystal Lake Park would eventually go out of business was twofold. Number one, the Great Depression. People didn't have extra money to go out and spend and buy tickets to the park. And two, it had, as you see here, since 1925, since virtually its opening. This is June 15th, and then certainly a few days later, we get the death and then the lashing and all. Quite a week for Crystal Lake Park, right? It opens in late May, and then all this stuff happens within the first couple weeks of June. But if you notice here, it says ministers fight Sunday amusement. There were a whole host of preachers and ministers in Marion who believed that Sunday was not a day for that kind of stuff. that they should be at church, they should be at home studying their Bible, doing all those kinds of things. And so dancing and going on roller coasters, being with your boyfriend or girlfriend, or doing that kind of stuff, that wasn't how you should behave. So they fought to have Crystal Lake Park closed on Sundays. And it took a while, but that eventually happened. So imagine an amusement park. It needs the weekends, right? I mean, it has to have the weekends in order to stay open, because that's when most of its business is going to occur. And sure enough, when they closed on Sundays and you combine that with the problem of the Depression, and eventually Crystal Lake would have to close up. This was the minister who led the charge against the park. His name was Jesse Swank. He was a very, very famous preacher in Marion. He was big all over town. Everybody knew Reverend Swank. All right, as you see there, it closed in 1934. No idea why that's blocked. Here's another picture. Check this out. This is what the pool looked like. If you notice, it says Crystal Lake Bathing Beach. That's what it looked like when it was up and running. This interior part here, that was kind of the kiddie pool, as you see the slide and people kind of wading and just bathing. It was shallow. This over here, and you can see the platform so you could dive. This was the deep end. Guys, what this was a quarry. It was a limestone quarry that had been turned in and filled in and turned into a pool or a lake, if you want to call it. All right. There's a photograph. So one was a artist rendering of a photograph. This is an actual photograph. Notice it looks quite a little different. Here you can see the rocky edge. Black and white doesn't really do this much justice, but it was really a pretty impressive place. My grandfather was actually a lifeguard at the Crystal Lake pool in 1948 when he was 18 years old that summer. How about this? The National Football League. This is pretty cool. The NFL, yeah, that's right. The same one. Marion had a team. So there was the Cleveland Browns, not at this time, but you can imagine the same league that had the Browns, the Bengals, the Cowboys, the Packers, the Bears, all those teams, the ones you watch on Sunday that have millionaire players. Well, in 1922 and 1923, Marion, Ohio had a team in the NFL. It was called the Oorang Indians. They played 2 seasons in the National Football League. They played only one home game. They played 20 games, 10 games each season. Only one of them was home. They were a traveling team. They played at Lincoln Park against, look at this, the Columbus Panhandle. Columbus had a team too. It was on October 8th, 1922. Let me just first say this, and I want to be fair. When I say the NFL, it absolutely 100% was the NFL. You can pause me and go look it up. It was absolutely the NFL. But what I got to say is the NFL wasn't anything like it is today. Completely different animal. It was the college game. College football was a million times more popular. It was at this same time in 1922, 1923 that Ohio Stadium down in Columbus, Ohio State's football stadium was built. And it held originally 80,000 people, right? And professional football was being played at Lincoln Park. I mean, so completely different. And so so as much as I like to say, wow, we had an NFL team, we did. There's no two ways about it. However, it was a different animal. The NFL was a different league. Jim Thorpe was the player coach, and ironically, the entire roster was made up of Native Americans that he recruited. Jim Thorpe, for some of you that know, Jim Thorpe was by all intents and purposes the greatest athlete of the 20th century. I want you to listen to what I'm about to tell you. Jim Thorpe is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So he's a Hall of Fame football player, one of the best ever, right? He's an incredible football player, so much so he's in the Hall of Fame. He also won the gold medal in Rome for the pentathlon. The pentathlon is 10 separate events. javelin and shot put and discus and running and hurdling and jumping and high jump and pole vault and all these different things. And you earn points. And it is generally regarded that the winner of the pentathlon is the world's greatest athlete. Well, he won that award going away. Plus, he played professional football and was a Hall of Famer. Plus, he played Major League Baseball. Plus, he played professional basketball. That is no joke. That's legit. You can look it up. Now, the professional basketball that he played was done before there was anything called the NBA. They didn't have the NBA then, but he was being paid to play basketball. This was an incredible, incredible athlete. There's really never been anybody like Jim Thorpe, and he was a Native American. There's this photograph. Jim Thorpe was actually from Oklahoma. He was born on a reservation. His Indian name was Bright Path, but he had an Irish father who gave him the name Jim Thorpe. He was biracial. He had an Irish father and a Native American mother, and he was an incredible, incredible athlete. There you go. So this name Oorang, what's that all about? How did it end up in Marion? It was actually in Marion County. If you guys know the small town of Leroux, Leroux was seen as the quote-unquote home of the Oorang Indians, even though all those guys stayed in Marion. They played their only home game in Marion. Leroux was the de facto home of the team. And the reason why is because the sponsor of the team was a guy named, oh, goodness. I can't believe I just stuttered on that. Walter Lingo. Oh, gone it. Can't believe I stuttered on that. I want to back that up while I was going at it. Walter Lingo, well, that's embarrassing, huh? Walter Lingo was the breeder of dogs. And the kind of dogs that he bred and the kennel he had, they were Airedale dogs. If you've ever seen an Airedale, this is what an Airedale looks like. And he even has a breed of Airedale still today called Oorang. As a matter of fact, if you Google Oorang Airedales, it's a breed of giant Airedale. Get up to over 100 pounds. These things are very large. Typically, the Airedale is a smaller breed in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 pounds. He was able to breed them very large, and they were very popular, and he sold them all over the world. So what was interesting is that he used his football team as a way of advertising his dog kennel. And here's the team, which is super cool. Very, very neat. Again, all Native Americans. Here's Jim Thorpe in the middle. And the team was a traveling team, like I said. And as much as people liked going to the football game was a lot different back then. You play the first half, then you go in the locker room in the halftime, and you strategize and you decide how you're going to attack the defense or attack the offense at the second half. No. That's not how they did that. What they did is they played the first half, and then at halftime, they put on a dog show. Here you can see right here the mascot. There you go. A little Airedale down there. Back, they would have several of them, and they went in the crowd and showed off the dogs and told them where you could get one like it. And they had tricks and all kinds of stuff. And they were one of the most well-attended NFL teams going because people loved to not only watch the football and see Jim Thorpe, but also for the dog show. Pretty cool. Here's the letterhead of the Oorang Indians. Some of you might be stopping this and say, wait a minute, what's that? That's a swastika. That comes along in the 1940s with the Germans and the Nazis, a very nasty symbol representing a nasty time in world history. But Native Americans have been using the swastika for centuries as a good luck charm. So it was almost like Hitler hijacked that symbol. So I wanted to show you this letterhead showing Jim Thorpe as the coach, Walter Lingo. And I always get that question, oh, it looks like a swastika. Well, there it is. But it was seen as a good luck charm. It certainly wasn't in the 1920s. Nobody knew who Adolf Hitler was or the Nazi Party or anything like that. So there's nothing bad here. This is actually a good luck symbol. Again, sticking with the National Football League. I don't know why that did that. Let's back that up for a second. Here you go. This is in Leroux, one of the historical markers that talks about the team. Here's another one. This is out of the Baltimore newspaper. Take a look here. You see Oorang Indians. It talks about the team. And then if you look here, Marion, Ohio. So there's the troop. Now what's cool, check out these names. I think it zooms in for you. Look at these over here. Other members of the team are attaché of last year's Sherman College team. That's his name. Longtime sleep of Haskell University. St. Germain, Boutwell, Chinook, Downwind, Bush, Lone Wolf, War Eagle, Running Deer, Strong Wind, Big Bear, and Thunder. Those are the names of the players. They're all Indian names. Most of those guys had what they would have called back then Christian names, like John Smith, but they also had their Indian name, which was their given Indian name from their Indian families, and that's what they translated into: Strong Wind, Big Bear. Like I told you, Jim Thorpe was known as Bright Path. I thought this is cool. This is from that same Baltimore newspaper in 1923. Check this out, this cartoon showing them coming to town to take on, believe it or not, the Baltimore Colts. Some of you have heard of the Indianapolis Colts, right? If you've heard of the Indianapolis Colts, that team before it moved to Indianapolis was the Baltimore Colts. And that Baltimore Colts played in 1923, our very own Oorang Indians. How about Big League Baseball? Big League Baseball actually did come to Marion, sorta, right? We did not have a team, but what we did do is the Cubs played an exhibition game here in September 1920. This is actually one of the things that you had to read about in one of your early modules, so I'm not going to spend a bunch of time. It was at Lincoln Park against a local team, the Kerrigan Taylors. It was part of Warren Harding, Senator Harding's presidential campaign that summer and fall of 1920. Here's a couple of photographs, I believe. There you go. There's the president, or the would-be president. Notice down here at the bottom, I'm sorry, you can't hardly see that, but that says the Pittsburgh Pirates also played at Lincoln Park. Take a look here. Here you go. Again, you read about some of this. And I think, yeah, so if you've heard of the Pittsburgh Pirates, they also played at Lincoln Park. They were exhibition games. Miss America. We've had a Miss America. You ever heard of the Miss America pageant? Marion had one of those as well. Her name was Marilyn Meskey. She was crowned in 1938. She lived on South Prospect Street with her mother. She taught dance. She was a young lady. And she won Miss Ohio and then eventually went on to Atlantic City, New Jersey to win the Miss America pageant. Famous, famous, famous pageant. I'm sure your parents and grandparents know all about Miss America. And when she came home, they said that 30,000 people showed up to congratulate her and welcome her back to home. They had her program at Harding Stadium, which was super cool. It had opened in 1935, and there it is in 1938. They welcomed her. It was really cool. There's her picture. She loved her time in Marion. She came home, worked in Marion again with her mother, teaching piano and dance, until she met a man from Columbus who she married, and eventually they retired to Florida. She has since passed away, but she was very, very proud of her time in Marion. And had we had the opportunity to go on our field trip, or if you get the opportunity, I so encourage you to go to Heritage Hall, the Popcorn Museum, walk through, and they've got this very statue here, that, or not statue, but trophy of Miss America, and they've got a nice little display, Miss Meskey. How about professional hockey? We also had professional hockey here in Marion. The team was called the Marion Barons. They were established in 1953. They played in the Coliseum. Believe it or not, our Coliseum, this building at the fairgrounds, was built as a hockey facility. So when you've ever been there, if you've been there with your parents, maybe they went to vote, maybe you went to graduation, right? Marion Harding holds graduation there. Anytime you've ever been in the Coliseum, maybe for one of those old indoor football games, that building was built originally for ice hockey, and it did exceedingly well. The team was pretty good. They had a good record. They sold a bunch of tickets. It did really, really well, but it only played one season because after that, the NHL, the large hockey league, the same one the Blue Jackets are in, it would eventually change, and the Barons team, which was a minor league team that was affiliated with a Cleveland hockey team in the NHL, They moved them, and Marion was kind of on the outside looking in. So it was kind of a bad luck kind of thing. But there he is. The Marion Baron mascot was called Whitey, but there he is. The hockey team. How about circuses, parades, and festivals? Both Ringling Brothers and Barnum Bailey Circus and Buffalo Bill Wild West Show played in Marion. When they played here, again, I wish I could show you some pictures first. We also had, and I'll talk about those in a second, the U.S. Open Drum and Bugle Corps competition was held in Marion for almost 30 years. Those, again, your parents, grandparents, no doubt remember the U.S. Open. It was a huge, massive event it was like the national championship of marching bands was held right here in Marion. It was a huge U.S. Open parade, and all the bands played, and it was really pretty impressive for many, many years. Take a look at this postcard. Here you see the Marion County Courthouse. This is Center Street. This would be West Center Street. This is East Center Street. Here you see the elephants parading past the courthouse. This is what they would do every summer when the circus came. They would get off the train way down here on West Center Street at Union Station, and then they would parade out to the east side where they would be kept. Now, the circus and the Buffalo Bill Wild West Show occurred sometimes at the fairground and sometimes on another ground called Aaron Holt Grounds. And it was actually on North Main Street, if you know where Pop Wiley's is, where George Street crosses Main right at Pop Wiley's. So if you know where Pop Wiley's is, it crosses over. It's almost right parallel to where Prospect Street overpass starts. So you got Pop Wiley's, and then you go down a little farther, and you get that the place that details your car, Sunshade or Suntime or whatever, and then the McDonald's right there on North Main. Just south of that, right there on the other side of the Pop Wiley's convenience store, that was what was known as Aaron Holt Grounds, which was basically a very large open field where they would put on these huge events. Really kind of cool. There's the Marion Cadets. So this is a marching band. It was a drum and bugle corps. So imagine a drum and bugle corps is a marching band minus the woodwinds. So no flutes, no clarinets, that kind of stuff. It was only brass instruments and drums. Here you go. This is pretty cool. I like that picture. How about the Popcorn Festival? Now down here, it's very difficult to see, and it doesn't give me the opportunity to drag it, and I know you need it for your notes. But this says Marion Popcorn Festival, 1981 through the present. 1981 through the present. The Popcorn Festival played, continues to play. It has done since 1981. I like this photograph because this shows one of the festival or the concerts downtown. This picture is taken from the Church and the firehouse on Church and Prospect. So you know where the main stage is for the Popcorn Festival. That firehouse right there, they took this picture from the roof of the firehouse, and you could see there are thousands of people here. If you've ever heard of the entertainer, oh goodness, he's Blake Shelton. That's him. He's on The Voice, I think, is a show that some of you watch. I'm not a country music fan, but he's a country guy and super, super, super popular. Well, when he was young and upcoming, the Popcorn Festival got him to come play, and he played here at Marion. I believe this photograph is. So, if I'm not mistaken, that might be the end of our show. I believe it is. So, if you were willing and able to hang with me, man, good for you. That was a long one. No doubt. It would have been several days, probably 3 days of talking if we'd have done it in class. But you stuck with me, and I appreciate that very much. Holy smoke, lights are about out as it's getting dark here. It's 8 o'clock, 25 after 8 on Saturday, and I'm doing this. So sorry about the dark, but here I am. Hopefully it all works, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care, guys.